Welcome back to the channel. So here we have the wiring diagram for this ground throw that I've got to use, and I've been a little bit apprehensive in setting it up because of the wiring. The white circular area kind of confused me due to the fact there was a kind of live and negative feed into the frog. These are the instructions for the ground throw, and there's no further explanation on how to wire it apart from the fact that it does say live or dead sidings. So I've went ahead and followed Tom's Trains and Things, who done a tutorial on how he installed his ground throw, and I've basically followed his wiring instructions for the Angel's Ridge. So putting in the Caboose Industry ground throws on these points, basically it hooks up like so. Excuse the shaky camera work, but yeah, there's a little pin on the end there that goes in, and that lets you throw the switch. Now obviously there's a gap here, so I've made a little cork template for it to sit, and then I can place this on here in that position, which should then throw a live frog through this that passes through the baseboard, whereas we've got to put the frog wire on the centre piece here. So frog wire will go in there, and then we have obviously if it's facing this way, that will be the red and that will be the black. Now that's where I'm still kind of figuring out exactly how this goes and what makes it work and what activates the frog properly as we pass through. So one of the issues is that with this all being pinned down, very reluctant to lift it because I've actually got these tight curves that are tighter than the 15-inch recommended in position, and I really don't want to upset the curves. So what I'm going to have to do in some way is to take this drill bit and feed it up from underneath. But what I will do is on the way down, I'll put a pilot hole where these bars go about here. So I'll put a pilot hole down through where the big one's supposed to come up, and then I'll drill up through using an old bit of cork to kind of catch it and stop me from damaging these little parts here that are going to hold the Caboose Industries ground throw in place. So yeah, these are just kind of some of the honest difficulties that I've kind of given myself in doing this layout in such a tight curve, that I'm slightly fearful for lifting up any of the track work and any of the point work, because as you can see, it's all kind of coming together. Once it gets pinned down, certain areas, once I move into the switching area, I'll certainly get a hang of drilling the holes prior to placing the points. But in this situation, my eagerness in order to get the curve up and running and get that, and I had to retweak that curve as I said, so I'm kind of reluctant to lift these points and upset the curves by lifting the track and relaying it, because it's all kind of running perfect. So yeah, let's crack on. And I'll start drilling this and see if I can get this Caboose Industries ground throw set up in this area. So here's the Caboose Industries ground throw. I know I keep dropping this company's name, I should just say ground throw. I always for some reason mention that part first. But yeah, this is the part, this is the instructions. These are the pieces that you get. So you got all these pieces. I'll show you what parts I've taken out and used. So initially, let's get it all out. These are the parts that needed for this particular build that I'm doing. But on this, what we have are separate fittings. So let's explain it clearly. This part here at the end here is where you put in your attachment that fits onto the tie bar on the point. So in order to insert the right one, you refer to the instructions, which give you an idea of the connectors, what scale and what brand the little attachments are. So for these attachments here, you can see we have 5 different ones. Now this one here is a double pin, and on the double pin it's too long to go in for when you attach this part here. So what I've done is I've cut that down. So we'll have the double pin. So that's the double pin one. And what we do is we get a pair of snips. We take this part here. Oh, someone's just been shot. And snip that end part off. So we're now left with this little part. Now this little part is now pushed into here. As I said, the plastic is quite brittle, so when you're attaching it, be very careful in how you push that in. So I'm not going to do it here because I could tend to hold the amount close to my body. I push my finger on here to support it because obviously this bar moves and you don't want it moving while in, so it's in the kind of closed position as it were. So I hold it in such a way that I've got a good grip of it like so, and then you gently squeeze that into position. Care needs to be taken when you're squeezing this into position to make sure you don't apply too much pressure on the little pin. You don't want to go breaking the little pin here. So when you're applying pressure, make sure it's evenly across this part here. It can be a wee bit jaggy because you've just cut it, but at least that fitting is now in, so that will now throw the point. So if we move it like so. Now for the connector, we have this little brass connector, and that basically, the 2 spades of it face forward towards the hole. So there's a hole here, and in there is the little slot where this sits. So we put that in there. Easier said than done. So now we have the connector. Hopefully this camera work isn't too dodgy. So we want to make sure these little spades poke out far enough that when you introduce this part that they're pushing against this in order to get a good contact. So the next part we have to put in, this incidentally is just a base plate where, like I'm doing on the layout, I've got an area where I don't have the 2 little support bar sleepers coming out to go underneath it, so this helps raise the height up of it and adds a little bit more support to the mount. But realistically these parts are no longer needed. Another part that we have is the tiny this wee thing here. That's the slot in. So in here, that little hole, that's the slot in. So the secret to it, if I can get something to hold it, can we see this? Be difficult to focus on it. But the way this little pin is designed, at the bottom side here there's like a semicircular loop, and then there's a flat side, and then there's a little pin on top. Trying to show you that so you can see what it is. Just now it's upside down. Let's see, that's actually the way that it should go in. So hopefully that shows you, and the flat side must go towards the contact. But what I've been doing is putting a tiny bit of super glue inside here, just a little blob of super glue to hold that in place, because when it was flush I just felt as though with the movement of this going back and forward, this might work free from that slot and could pop out. So I'm going to get the super glue, put a little bead in there, and we'll fasten this little pin in there. So yeah, little blob of super glue just to the back side. See if you can see this. Now to fit this little part here. See if you can see that okay. Here's camera work. Actually, I am going to take off the support plate. Stick that in there. Slot that in. So now you can see that little pin's in there with the tiny little bit of super glue. You just want to make sure everything's kind of square, and you can see that little brass tabs are poking out, and that'll be for the connector when this passes through here. That'll touch against the brass tabs. So make sure that's secure in position, leave that to dry, then I'll come back and I'll show you the fitting of the other parts. So that's the little tie bar connector put on, the brass connector placed in the slot, and the little plug that holds it in the slot all put together. Leave that to dry for 10 minutes and then we'll come back to it. Now that the part is dried, we can now look at assembling the other features to this ground throw, and this involves placing this part here through this slot here. So we carefully insert that. Now the reason I do it at this stage is for putting the wires and this little part on later. This is a little spacer. It helps keep the spades apart once they pass through the ground throw. So once you have the ground throw and this part fixed in place, this little part then slots on over here, and then you can solder your wires on, and this keeps them evenly spaced. So the way this little part goes is there's two parts to it, where you have, let's get our pointer, on this side there's a little lip, little plug, and that little plug goes in this slot here, and then we have a little folding plug that slots in the other side. So, oh, taxi for Brian. So make sure we clip that under there. So that's the first clip under, and getting the screwdriver, holding it in place. we then fold this little tab under. Difficult to do on camera. Let's squeeze and push. Yeah, I'd say that's firmly in place now. Just a wee shake to show that this isn't wiggling. And then if we look at the connector, we can see where the copper tabs push against these 3 pins. And then when we move it, like so, changes polarity. So depending on the negative and positive feeds, the frog in the middle. You can see how that works now. So the next part to do on this is to take the little spacer that we have, insert that over the end. Now obviously when you're putting these little spades in, make sure that your connector, you've got the 3 metal pins on the inside to touch the connector. So we've now got that popped on the end, and gently we can slide it up. Little connectors. There's a little notch in these that you've got to slide it past. If you can see them there, those little notches, that initially catches on them, but once it's passed, that's through. That's why your hole through the baseboard needs to be big enough to accept the width of this piece of plastic, not just the width of these 3 pins. So when you're measuring it up and you're going to install one, make sure you measure up to the width of this for your drill bit in order for it to pass through. My drill bit's a little bit neat, so I have to drill the hole and then I use a file to elongate the hole in order to fit this spacer. So now we have the ground throw pretty much ready to get wired up and installed on the layout. And a point of note, there are always spare parts. This is a spare plug in case you lose the one that holds that one in place. So hopefully that's cleared up any issues for anyone that's looking to install one of these, build one of these and use them. I just thought I would share my thoughts and progress on it, and hopefully that's been enlightening to people that are interested in using these ground throws that I would highly recommend, to be honest. They're excellent. Using blue and yellow wires for the negative and positive, this helps me distinguish from point power to the ground throws and track power, which is red and black. I now take the ground throw to the layout, feeding the wires through the pre-drilled hole to set it up for position and working. So that's the ground throw with the 3 pieces of metal coming from it. I've still to solder on the frog wire, which is here. That'll go in that middle one. So coming out under the switch itself, there is a hole where a little pin goes inside that. I think it's called a tie bar or something. That actually moves the point. So I've got this little piece super glued in there. I've now got that part clipped into position as per instructions, which leads down to the 3 little connectors that basically help change the frog polarity. Now I noticed that when it's hooked onto it, it's at a little bit of an angle due to these little spades, but they don't actually move when you throw the switch. So if I throw the switch, I can't do that and hold the phone at the same time. I'll get a better camera position for that and show you that. So I have these pieces of cork here that I've put in. It's a 3mm cork, and then a little bit that's added in there to help elevate it is 1.5mm. Now when I get all glued down and in position with the pin in place, I will then be able to throw the point. So yeah, trying a better zoom position to show you this ground throw. Obviously a lot of the American and Canadian people know about these things, but for those of us in the UK, they're a wonderful little device that I had to import from America in order to get them. So basically we have the throw, the ground throw itself, supported on 3mm and 1.5mm. Excuse my dog snoring in the background, he always likes coming in when I'm doing my model railway stuff as a little bit of company. But if I hold that there and throw the switch, you can see that's moved the point. Throw it back, because it really needs to be stuck down in order for it to work. But once that's in position, that's going to be quite solid for throwing the point to and fro and hopefully changing the polarity, because this little brass tab here is on the negative and the frog spade connector. And then when it moves that way, then the right hand side of it is on the frog and the left hand is on the live. Then move it back, frog and negative. So I'm going to wire them up. I haven't cut the wires in this frog in order to keep these parts powered and to see how that works. I have insulated the plates because I've got power feeds beyond them, so it'll stop it from shorting it out when it goes to the positive going on to the negative and vice versa. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, these are interesting pieces of kit. It's my first time installing them, and I'll get all this built up, glued in, wired up, and we'll see if we have any success with it. On these ground throw base plates, there's little holes in these areas on either side of the throw itself. So what I've done is put in some track pins. I drilled a hole just to let it go into the board a little bit, because these tend to bend with too much pressure on them. So a little hole into the board through the cork, and the same on the other side. And you can see now that the point is fixed in place, and it's now changing the point. The ground throw is fixed in place, should I say. And you can see the little connector here as it changes over from live frog to frog neutral. So I'm going to wire up the frog, see how that goes. There are wires in this track here, not the best soldering, but that's all going to change soon. Yeah, a lot of that stuff unfortunately I can't cover up. Another kind of blob here as well, it's not great, but we'll do our best to conceal it with scenery and etc. It was experimental as far as I'm not very good at soldering, but we're getting there. So that's that bit done, and obviously we have this bit here as well. So I'll get the frog wired up. Let's see. And these are the 3 wires that are associated with that ground throw. So let's see how we go and see if we can get it all to work. So here we are working on the floor. Got my 60-40 rosin flux solder. This little pot helps tin the soldering tip. That stuff's superb. And just got the iron heating up. So this is already tinned. Show that. And we've still to tin that little point in there as well. So let's try and get that soldered on there without setting fire at the house. So that's those 3 points soldered on. I just used a blue shrink thing to cover that part. But that's them wired up. Now let's get it wired into the layout and see how this electrofrog point works on this setup, which I kind of followed from Tom's Trains and Things. He kind of done an explanation of this Caboose Industries ground throw and this similar one, so I've tried to kind of recreate what he's done. So we'll see how much I've learned or what I'm missing. So now we have the ground throw wired up. The idea is that with the rails we have on this side is the red, positive, on that side is the black, which should run accordingly through this point. Now this is isolated here and here, isolating fish plates. It hasn't been customized, so it still has a little wires joining in these parts here. So I'm hoping that when the feed comes in, that the frog will change polarity accordingly, where that will, when it's travelling this way, that will be negative, and when it's travelling that way, it will be positive on that rail. Now when we come through this insulated fish point, we have this part of the track powered here. So I've got a positive, negative. Now what I've done is removed the point and just put a little bit of flex track in there, purely for test purposes, so we can see how this works. So let's get the power put on, let's dig out the little 040 shunter and see if we can get some movement up through this point and through this point this way. Now that the ground throw is wired up, there is a negative going to the terminal block and a positive going to the terminal block. So this is now powered, and the green frog basically comes straight from here. So I'm hoping that in this current configuration that will work. So let's give it a try. Here is my Series TS 3-track Gauge Master controller with the simulated brake on track 1. What we're going to do now is test to see if this point works. So we'll just flick that in a direction and then we'll go up onto the track and we'll see what happens. Right, we want it coming into the point. So it's travelled through the point okay that way. And that way. Now let's throw the ground throw, bring it back through, see if it works. Oh, seems to have worked. We now have power. Through that point. Flick the ground throw back. Wow. Wow. There we go. Seems to be working okay. I need to set a good speed on this, but it's very good for testing these points. So we'll get out a loco with a longer chassis and we'll see how that goes, because that one is purely to test current, that little loco. It's not for the smooth, slow running. So we'll try something with a longer chassis going through this point. Let's see how the alco goes through this point now. See if there's any short circuits. Nope. So the frog was working that way. Now let's change the point over. So the frog polarity should change now. Oof. Isn't it wonderful when a plan comes together? So there we go. It looks like when you come under the layout, the way I've wired this up, we have the blue and yellow wires going into the negative and positive, blue negative, yellow positive. And then when we come out, we see that the frog is a green wire going into the centre there. So it means that the ground throw is powered and the frog is changing polarity as we run the locomotive through it. So it means the frog is now on the positive polarity. Wow. I'm more surprised than anything that that works, folks, because I'm not very confident when it comes to doing these electrical things, but certainly I challenge them up for doing. and I don't like things getting the better of me that way. So now we've successfully wired up the Caboose Industries crown throw. I'll carry on doing the rest. So thanks again for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next update. So here's an overall view of the track plan. As you come round, we obviously have this point which comes into the run round. And that's quite long. We can get 4 wagons in there, 4 log cars in there, and depending on the size of the caboose as well, we can fit that in there as it carries on round the loop. So in here will be an engine shed of some form, a wooden affair. This will be an open siding but with a diesel refueling point for the diesel switcher, and also coal and water on this side for using steam locos and switchers. As we move along, we come to the Y, which then feeds into this section here. So we have enough room here for 2 box cars, possibly 3, and room for the switcher to come in here and then reverse back along into either the engine shed or the fueling area. And then in this point here we have 2 sidings. There'll be a building in this area here relevant to the freight that will be in here. There'll be a building over here relevant to the freight here, and then that old Metcalf engine shed is just a relevant building just to give you an idea of what can fit in that area there. There will be a road coming in through the back. This mess here will be the little town, and I will be building the mountain backdrop, where there'll be a tunnel on this side going into the mountain backdrop, and a tunnel on that side going into the mountain backdrop, and the mountain backdrop should be about 300 to 400 millimeters high, and they'll be doing it with foam and such like. It will be done in parts so I can lift it to access the track at the rear, and it will also be removable for when this layout needs to be separated and rebuilt elsewhere in the future. So there we go, an overall view of Angels Ridge. Basic roundy layout with the basic angle nook and engine sidings. Yeah, the scenery will make it rock though.